One man, a burning tank destroyer that could explode at any second. 6 enemy tanks and roughly 250 German soldiers advancing across an open, frozen field. He had already ordered every single one of his men back to safety in the tree line. He stayed, alone, out in the open, wounded in the leg, with nothing left but a phone line to call in artillery, until even that wasn't enough. So he climbed onto the deck of a flaming, abandoned tank destroyer, grabbed hold of its mounted machine gun, and for the next hour, he became the only thing standing between his men and annihilation. This is not a movie pitch. This actually happened on a field outside the French village of Holzwehr, and the man who did it wasn't a hardened career officer with 20 years of service. He was 19 years old. 4 years earlier, when he'd first tried to enlist, the United States Army had taken one look at his small frame and turned him away from being too skinny. This is the true story of Audie Murphy, a dirt-poor Texas farm boy who became the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II, and who then, almost by accident, became one of the biggest movie stars in America. Not by pretending to be a hero on screen, by already having been one. Audie Leon Murphy was born on June 20, 1925 in a small farming community called Kingston, Texas, the 7th of 12 children. His parents, Emmett and Josie Murphy, were sharecroppers, meaning they didn't even own the land they broke their backs farming. The Great Depression hit families like the Murphys hardest of all. There were years when there simply wasn't enough food, and Audie, along with his brothers and sisters, worked the cotton fields for $1 a day just to help keep the family fed. His father eventually walked away for good, unable or unwilling to carry the weight of providing for 12 children. Audie was still a boy. Not long after, his mother, worn down by years of hardship and grief, died. It was a blow that could have ended his story right there. Some of his younger siblings, with no parents left to care for them, were sent to an orphanage. Audie dropped out of school around the 5th grade. There was no time for lessons. He had mouths to feed and a family that was falling apart around him. He picked up a rifle, not for sport, but for survival, hunting rabbits and squirrels in the woods near his home, because if he came back empty-handed, his brothers and sisters might not eat that night. Necessity turned him into one of the finest natural marksmen in the country, though nobody watching a hungry teenage boy sighting down a barrel at a rabbit could have possibly imagined where that skill would eventually take him. Then on December 7, 1941, everything changed. Not just for Audie, but for the entire country. Pearl Harbor was attacked, and the United States was at war. Audie Murphy, just 16 years old, barely over 100 pounds soaking wet, tried to enlist immediately. The Marines took one look at him and said no. The paratroopers said no. He was too small, too young, too slight to be a soldier. Most people would have taken that as the final word. Audie didn't. His older sister helped him falsify his birth records, adding a year to his age, and in June of 1942, the United States Army finally agreed to take him. Nobody, not his commanding officers, not his fellow recruits, not the US Army itself, had any idea what they had just signed up. Private Murphy's training was rigorous, and by his own later accounts, he threw himself into it with a fierce, almost desperate intensity, as if he had something to prove not to his country, but to himself. He shipped out to North Africa in 1943 as part of the legendary 3rd Infantry Division, and from there his war became a brutal tour of some of the most vicious fighting of the entire European theater. The invasion of Sicily, Italy, the nightmare of the Anzio beachhead, where Allied forces clung to a strip of coastline under relentless German counterattack for months. The liberation pushed through Rome and beyond. Something happened to Audie Murphy in the combat that his fellow soldiers found almost impossible to explain. Off the battlefield, he was quiet, even shy, soft-spoken, polite, a young man who still carried the manners of a poor Texas farm boy. But the instant that shooting started, something in him transformed completely. He became fast, precise, and utterly fearless. Men who served beside him described a soldier who seemed to have no instinct for self-preservation whatsoever. Only an instinct to protect the men around him, whatever the cost to himself. The instinct was tested in the most painful way possible in August 1944, during the Allied invasion of southern France. Murphy's closest friend in the unit, a fellow soldier named Letty Tipton, spotted what looked like a German position waving a white flag. Tipton stood up to accept the surrender. It was a trick. The German machine gun crew opened fire and killed him where he stood. What Audie Murphy did that followed became legend within his own regiment. Consumed by grief and fury that witnesses said was almost frightening to see, He charged the German position alone, whipped out the machine gun crew that killed his friend, then turned their own captured weapon on the remaining German soldiers nearby, killing or forcing the surrender of the rest of the position single-handedly. For this act, the army awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, one of the highest honors the United States can bestow for valor in combat. It was, almost unbelievably, not even close to the peak of what he was still going to do. By January 1945, Audie Murphy, not yet 20 years old, was already wearing the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 silver stars and 2 bronze stars on his uniform. And the single most extraordinary day of his life hadn't happened yet. The winter of 1944 into 1945 was brutal. Along the French-German border, the Battle of the Bulge had just ground to a halt, and Nazi Germany, refusing to accept the inevitable, launched what would become its last major offensive on the Western Front. Near the small French village of Halsware, in a frozen patch of forest, Murphy's Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, had already been decimated in early fighting. Of roughly 120 enlisted men, over 100 had been killed or wounded, and every officer except Murphy himself was dead. He had been given command of what remained almost by default. There was simply no one else left to give the orders. On January 26, 1945, the Germans struck again. 6 tanks, supported by an estimated 250 infantrymen, rolling straight at Murphy's exhausted, battered company across open frozen ground where the earth was too hard to even dig a foxhole. Murphy made the only sound tactical decision available. He ordered every one of his remaining men to fall back to the relative safety of the woods behind them. Then he stayed forward, alone, at his command post, calling in artillery strikes by field telephone to try to slow the German advance. An American tank destroyer nearby took a direct hit and burst into flames. Its crew scrambled out and retreated, a burning, potentially exploding hunk of steel now sitting empty in the middle of a battlefield. Most human beings, understandably, would have seen that as a reason to run further away. Audie Murphy climbed on top of it. He found its mounted 50 caliber machine gun still intact and opened fire on the advancing Germans, fully exposed on the deck of a burning vehicle. With tanks and infantry closing in from multiple directions for roughly an hour, wounded again in the leg, Murphy held the position essentially by himself, directing artillery fire between bursts from the machine gun, killing or wounding an estimated 50 enemy soldiers and breaking the momentum of an assault that could easily have overrun his entire company. At one point, German infantry got close enough that he was fighting at nearly point-blank range, still refusing to abandon the position his men needed him to hold. When his ammunition finally ran dry, Murphy climbed down off the wreckage, gathered what remained of his exhausted company, and personally led them in a counterattack that retook the ground. Later, when someone asked him why he'd done it, why a man would climb onto a burning tank and fight off an army rather than simply retreating to safety with everyone else, Murphy gave an answer with no bravado in it at all. They were killing my friends. On June 2, 1945, General Alexander Patch, commanding general of the U.S. 7th Army, presented 20-year-old Audie Murphy with the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest award for valor. By the time the war in Europe ended, Murphy had received every single decoration of gallantry that US military had to offer, several of them more than once, along with 5 decorations from a grateful France and 1 from Belgium, 33 medals, ribbons, and citations in total. He had fought through 9 major campaigns across North Africa and Europe. He had been wounded 3 times. He was without a shred of Hollywood exaggeration the most decorated American combat soldier of the entire Second World War. America welcomed Audie Murphy back not just a soldier, but as a symbol. In July 1945, his face appeared on the cover of Life magazine under the words, "Most Decorated Soldier." He was 20 years old, and the whole country wanted to shake his hand. But medals don't erase what a man carries inside him. For years afterward, he battled what his generation called battle fatigue, what doctors today would immediately recognize as severe post-traumatic stress. He struggled with insomnia that kept him awake. For years, he couldn't fall asleep without a loaded pistol tucked under his pillow, a habit forged by 2 years of never being able to fully let his guard down. What set Murphy apart was that decades before it was socially acceptable or medically understood, he refused to stay quiet. He spoke publicly, a war hero with a chest full of medals, willing to stand up and say, "I'm still fighting something, and I'm not the only one." He pushed the federal government to take the psychological cost of combat seriously and to fund real research, helping the men still suffering long after they had come home. It's a legacy as important as anything he did on a battlefield. The same Life magazine cover that made Audie Murphy a household name also caught the eye of one of Hollywood's biggest stars, James Cagney, on not much more than a hunch that this soft-spoken young war hero had some kind of screen presence. Cagney invited Murphy out of California in September 1945. The transition was rocky. Murphy had no training as an actor, no connections, and by several accounts, very little confidence in front of a camera, still quietly working through the same private battles that followed every soldier home. Everything changed in 1955. Murphy did something almost no actor before or since has ever done. He agreed to play himself, reliving his own war on screen in a film adaptation of his memoir, To Hell and Back. A war hero turned movie star whose fame reached the very countries where he had once fought. On May 28, 1971, he was 45 years old. While flying as a passenger on a private plane, Audie Murphy was killed in a crash into the side of a mountain. He was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors on June 7, 1971. He didn't play a hero for Hollywood. He was one first.